very warm welcome to this, the latest in our Sport for Business leadership interviews. I'm delighted to be joined by Sarah O'Connor, the head of sport at Wilson Hartnell, one of the key advisors across the business of sport and sporting organisations as well. So first things first, a very warm welcome, Sarah. And how are you keeping over these last few weeks?
Yeah, no, thankfully everybody's healthy, so no real complaints. I think we're probably all, collectively conscious that there's a bit of a cloud hanging over humanity at the moment. And so, look, our current way of life, I think, while very privileged compared to many, is definitely, I think, placing everybody under a degree of personal and probably professional pressure. I think there's an element of discomfort that's driven by the uncertainty. But I think all in all, I think hugely comforted by the reality that some of the world's brightest minds are currently working as hard as they can, not just to treat those that are ill, but also to find a treatment and a vaccine. And perhaps I'm filling too much time watching cheesy sports movies, but I'm inclined to believe that they'll get there, and potentially sooner rather than later. So I think fingers crossed.
Hopefully we've been trying to keep that sense of optimism going, and that came out in the survey that we did at the beginning of the month about how people felt about it. And there was a real sense that we were willing to give credit to both governments, sporting organisations, businesses, everybody who has been involved so far in actually managing it. So fingers crossed that will be the case. Tell me, Wilson Hartnell, one of our big agencies, one of the big advisors out there, it must have been very busy for you at the outset of this in terms of advising clients like Guinness and AIB, who would have been front and centre stage with regards to both the Guinness Six Nations and the All Ireland Championships.
Yeah, no, look, it's we're quite lucky in a way, to be part. We obviously have a big sports practice in Ireland, and in fact I think our Dublin sports practice is the biggest one in Europe from an Ogilvy perspective. But we are part of an international network, which is fantastic. And I suppose we have been able to kind of lean on some of those colleagues in terms of, some of them have been living this situation for about 2 months longer than we have, and been able to kind of adapt, take some of those and to inform our clients. I suppose, look, our mantra is all about kind of trying to make brands matter. That's what we try to do. It's at the heart of all our work. Be that kind of in the immediate, like right now, but as well into kind of, I suppose, quarterly and even into the longer term. And look, we're very lucky, I think, in the sports team, like you, Rob, that we managed to try to help our clients do that through the wonderful medium that is sport. And I think in some ways, while there's actually no live sport, and I think we're all missing that madly, sponsorship by its very nature is a long-term relationship, and a lot of these relationships, be it like AIB's, the GAA, Guinness with rugby, they're not partners. They're partnerships that go back, like in AIB's case, it's almost 28, 29 years, and Guinness too has such a long-standing relationship with rugby. But that goes back to many of our other clients, be it Electric Ireland and their relationship with the GAA. So I think, we need to, now what we're seeing is that brands, it's really time for brands to live their brand purpose. Now is actually about doing and kind of standing up to kind of showing and having the opportunity to do, as you kind of said you do. Like a lot of the last kind of 3 to 4 years there's been talk about kind of purpose-driven marketing. And in some ways, I think the current climate has really allowed people to kind of to show up and kind of to live that mantra. And I think the brands that are going to emerge from this public health emergency in the kind of best shape are those that have successfully going to transfer that purpose into action. Like people are looking for brands to set up. Some of the international research we've seen our colleagues in Ogilvy Consulting do actually show that kind of in the week of the 12th of March, kind of brand coronavirus related posts were doubled compared to the week before.
Right.
And as I kind of said, even though there is no there's no live sport, we still feel those sponsorship platforms offer brands a way to kind of live that brand purpose. We feel that now is the time for brands to kind of demonstrate support for those partnerships and key stakeholders. As we said, many of them are long-standing. Sport itself, I think, is undergoing an unprecedented crisis. I mean, there's more sport ongoing during the two world wars than there is at present. So there's definitely value for brands to be seen, I think, to supportive of those organisations. But even more than that, I think there's a Chinese proverb that says in times of crisis, there are always seeds of opportunity. And I think operating on that maxim, sponsorship, as we know, is really often about the fans as opposed to the property. And I think brands at this point can build real affinity during this time by continuing to leverage their sponsorships, despite maybe the event itself not happening. And I think we're seeing sports bodies all across the world, again, look of ways to help their partners do this, be it relaxing activation windows, be it opening their footage archive. And they're definitely being more flexible with brands than ever before. And we know that the fans are still there. If anything, I think we're consuming more media than ever before, and we're completely starved of our sports fix. We also, I think, know from Asia that people are looking for brands to add cheer and positivity, and what better way to do this than kind of through sport or indeed music or even purpose-led partnerships. So,
yeah, I think we've always known how important sport was in terms of the structure of the way that we live our lives and our society and our communities. And even though we don't have that ability to run up and down a sideline or to switch on the television or to go to Croke Park or the Aviva Stadium or you know, a League of Ireland game or anything like that, sport has still continued to play a really important part. We've seen community initiatives where it's been driven through clubs. We've seen all of the governing bodies standing up and making themselves available, making venues available for testing, really, you know, belt and braces logistics efforts to actually go. So the fact of having the sponsors having their backs to do that must be really important. Do you think, though, has there been much conversation or has there been an awful lot of assumption made because it hasn't been the most important conversation about how a brand will continue to support the sport, but the assumption is that we will stick together?
Yeah, no, I think as well, look, this is a journey for all of us. I think that, you know, at the start as well, we were all, let's be honest as well, all had to adapt from kind of working in a physical way in offices often to kind of moving out the entire workforce, you know, virtually or remotely, which I think it's actually kind of incredible the ease that that's been done by so many organizations, including all the sports organizations, to be fair, as well. And in fact, I think it's great to see some of them, like the sailing organization, cycling, getting up and running and organizing virtual competitions, and to do it so quickly. And I think you're right. I think when it probably comes to brands and sponsors, many of whom are big businesses, those first few weeks have definitely probably been, they've been more engaged with probably those issues, and also making sure that, you know, their COVID-19 response in terms of what they actually do as a business, you know, is out there and consumers understand it. But I think as this goes on and we're like looking into week 5 now, I do expect to see more of the brands and the sponsors come back on board and look for ways to leverage these long-term relationships, like in a couple of ways. One, to provide kind of useful content, and you've seen like the likes of, you know, we saw in China, Under Armour came home to do home workouts. There's no surprise that there's a plethora of that out there at the moment, the skills challenges. So, you know, people are trying to be useful. I think supporting your partners and stakeholders is also important. But then, you know, there is, I think what we haven't seen a huge amount of, but I think we will begin to see more, is maybe that cheer and positivity piece. I think, you know, we have kind of seen it in quiz nights, but I can kind of see an element where we go back and we're trying to connect people, albeit virtually, kind of leveraging kind of sport and kind of music in particular.
Okay, a lot of the brands are probably going to be looking for that creative spark to agencies like yourselves. And the world of agency relies on a healthy dose of collaboration and, you know, sort of throwing ideas up in the air and seeing which ones land, on their feet, so to speak. How has it been? You mentioned about how well business has actually translated into the virtual world, but has that been particularly challenging for somebody like you who does rely on that healthy collaboration and argument at times?
Yeah, well, I think for us, actually, like in retrospect, like, and with the benefit of hindsight, kind of looking back, I can't say that we had like premonition, or we were wise by way of foresight. But I suppose a couple of things that stood to us, like we're used to kind of working virtually for a start when we kind of plug into, the wider Ogilvy and even the WPP network, like other sports businesses in the network, we would have used a lot of these tools. And then secondly, also just in terms of some of the projects like the Guinness Six Nations, or even we've been lucky to work on Euro 2020, or even last year with the Open with the RNA based in St Andrews. We've always kind of had to embrace digital. It's just part of what we do. It's in the DNA. And in fact, we do have a bit of experience because of the nature of some of the work of having to do that. So from that respect, it's been really lucky. And then on another level, just in terms of our own team, I'm lucky just that I do work as part of a really brilliant team, I think, who instinctively kind of focus on what is or what can be possible. We're always...
You've been involved in some of the early ones, which actually went out there in a very social way. Electric Ireland picking their players of the tournament from the higher education in the GAA. We had AIB doing the same in the GAA and Camogie. Has that been something that you found relatively easy to get buy-in from both the brands and the organisations as well, in terms of doing something in the online world that would previously have been very much in the physical world?
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple of things that definitely fell in our favour. Like, we were lucky, I think, that we had a kind of an incredibly busy start to the year. I think at some stage we'd done something like 9 or 10 media days, never mind the activations, and so in a couple of weeks. And so a lot of some of those projects were kind of underway, and I think everybody was kind of committed to kind of finding a way to make them happen. I think coupled with that, we probably did see with a week or two out that we were probably likely to face kind of some form of kind of lockdown or restriction, and we kind of began to kind of plan as to how we could kind of transition some of these things into digital world. I know the media mightn't always agree, or they probably mightn't like this classification, but we kind of see them, almost as colleagues. So we were kind of very keen to kind of reach out to them as well and kind of chat through ways of working. And they were super accommodating in terms of also making kind of the transition to Zoom and maybe making use of kind of tools and I suppose even taking kind of copy or doing interviews in ways that they wouldn't normally have to. I think it was great to see the take of that. And I think even the week before those awards went out, we did our first kind of media day via Zoom, which was for Rugby Players Ireland, and kind of tackle your feelings. So we took some of the journalists through a kind of Zoom trial run the kind of day before, and everything worked. And having said that, I think we're all really looking forward to the day that we're back in Eli Place. And we were to have a Camogie Awards. It was Team of the Year. They were to go into AIB headquarters on Molesworth Street. So we were all kind of looking forward to that event. It's the first time it's going to be done in that format. But anyway, it will be back. But we're definitely kind of making do and being creative. And I think we're seeing everybody adapt to that. And in fact, to be fair, I think the Irish Sailing went out with their virtual awards at the weekend before we actually went live with Electric Ireland and AIB. So it's maybe them who have the credit for proof of concept.
Yeah, I think you're right. It will be nice to get back into a physical world for the conversations that happen around the edges, I think, perhaps more importantly. But do you think, has this changed the way that we might look to do things on a more permanent basis as well? Because, with the best will in the world, a roundtable press conference is pretty much the same in an online world as it is in the real world, only for the fact that we don't have to spend time commuting, and everything is recorded as well. So it's actually, it wins on many counts.
Yeah, no, I think for all of us, I think going back, I don't think we will go back to doing everything exactly the way it was done before. I think there can be very little doubt about that. Definitely some things will change. Whether every single media day will be done by Zoom, but it's not really something, would have necessarily given that much consideration to before, whereas I think it probably is going to be an option on the table. But I'd somehow going back, to the conversations around the edges and seeing people in person. I think there is going to be an element of people wanting to get back to that, but at least perhaps we'll be more open to accommodating maybe people that aren't in that position. So, it's hard to know exactly what lies ahead, but maybe we're more open to using a wider range of tools, and maybe it'll be somewhere in the middle, or a combination of the physical and the virtual world going forward.
I know in a previous life you served as CEO of the Federation of Irish Sports, so you'd be aware of a lot of the things that a lot of the smaller sports would be doing as well. There's a number of them have really struck me as being particularly imaginative in this whole period of time, and that they've put things out there like the volleyball online camp that they've had. Gymnastics Ireland has been good, Basketball Ireland has been good. Sports that might not otherwise manage to get much mainstream media have actually been finding that their feet in terms of producing social media that's getting out there to a wider audience than would have been the case.
Yeah, no, well, we actually have felt this kind of from the outset, and have been kind of in touch about the kind of federation and the Olympic Federation. There's an element of this that is a huge opportunity for sports out there that don't normally maybe get the airspace, simply because of the volume of live sport going on, whereas I think the values of sport and what sport stands for, and maybe in many ways it's kind of equipped us with some of the tools to cope with this crisis. And again, I think by its absence, the value of sport has probably never been more appreciated, not just maybe the big events, but also kind of the role it plays in day-to-day life. So, I do wonder, I think there is an opportunity for those organizations who can kind of use this time maybe to get out there and tell their stories. And I know some of them over time have felt maybe frustrated that some of the commercial opportunities that are there for bigger sports haven't been there for them. But, maybe this is a window. I think there is a window for some of them to get out there now, tell their stories, establish some credentials that might even kind of serve them quite well in the medium to long term.
Yeah, and in terms of projects that you're working on at the moment now, I know that none of us know exactly when we're going to be coming back, but there will be a point which is kind of there already now, where we're beginning to think that we need to advance the plans for how things might look when they do come back. And again, we know that there are dates in the diary already for the return of the Guinness Six Nations. I know you were involved in a lot of the activation that Guinness were doing around that. Is there a point at which you begin to accelerate in terms of that planning, or are we too far away yet from a definitive date as to when we might get back out there?
Yeah, no, well, I think, as I kind of mentioned earlier, like a lot of our planning is we try to look across the time horizons of making sure that our kind of brands are relevant right now, that they're kind of relevant in every quarter, and then that they're kind of relevant over time, over years. So that's really applicable at the moment. So I suppose, to answer the question, we're trying to do a little bit of everything. We're trying to have a plan in place for, as we'd all love, if like the best case scenario comes to land and we're back sooner than we think, or in the worst case scenario where it takes a bit longer, because going back to that point about sponsorship is a long-term relationship. Like just because maybe the championship isn't going to be able to kick off, well, it's not going to be able to kick off at the end of May or the beginning of June, doesn't actually mean that the GAA is any less relevant in people's day-to-day lives, and in many ways actually maybe it's even more relevant in a kind of funny way, or certainly what the core value of sport is more relevant to us. So I think we're all uncertain as to actually how the next few weeks and months are going to unfold, and what we're trying to do is to kind of plan for those different time horizons over the different scenarios of what might happen, because I think regardless of what's actually happening on the pitch, and nothing really at the moment, sport as a way for brands to connect with their audience or with their customers, both potential and existing, that still remains. And I think that there is opportunities out of this crisis and emergency for brands to leverage that in a way, I think, that actually brings a real benefit to consumers, cheers us up a little bit, which we all need. Yet at the same token, over the long term, will hopefully deliver for them commercially as well.
That's a great positive way to finish off. We've always known that sport was far more important than the result on any given afternoon or evening. And I just wish it didn't require such an epochal shift in terms of world society for us to have that proven, but that's the way it is. Well, the very best of luck to you, Sarah, and all of the team, obviously, at Wilson Hartnell. Thanks very much for your time today. Sport for Business carries on. We continue to bring you the daily news digests. Ironically, possibly never been busier. The business of sport carries on, even if much of it is speculative at the moment, but we've got endless content. We've got the next wave of our series of live webinars, which we'll be bringing to you over the coming weeks, and more of these interviews. But for the moment, Sarah O'Connor of Wilson Hartnell, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks for keeping us all connected, Rob.